Welcome to our Heritage Works. Today, we are going to powder some vegetables. We will do this through the method of freeze drying. The first thing that we will need to do is to gather our materials. I have already sharpened the knife and it's ready to go. I will be freeze drying many things today. These include onions and paprika peppers, I will also be doing apples. I have both Granny Smith and Pink Lady. I also have celery and carrots. Starting with the onions, I'm going to cut them in half from stem to stem. Then I will cut off one end. Finally, create little cuts in the onion, but not all the way through to the other end. Then I can turn the onion to the side and make about the same size cut go in the other direction. This will give me a nice, beautiful chop on the onion, and they'll be nice and fine and will make a wonderful minced onion. One of the powders I'll be making is onion powder. For that, I will use onion rings, in which case I will just simply cut the onions into nice rings, and I will put those on the freeze-dry tray, and that's all I need to do, because those can be bigger pieces than for the minced onion, because I'm going to throw them into a blender anyway, and it's going to become a powder, so it doesn't matter as long as I have enough room to get them dry in a relatively quick amount of time. Speaking of the freeze drying process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of these vegetables on trays, stick them in the freezer overnight, and then I will put them in the freeze dryer. After I put them in the freeze dryer and get them going, it's going to take a little over 24 hours in order for me to get them all dry, at which point I can do the rest of the process. So let's get all these vegetables chopped up and onto trays for freezing. Once the onions are chopped, whether it's finely minced or in rings, I'm going to put them on a freeze dryer tray, and then I'm going to cover them with plastic. And then I'm also going to put little legs on each corner. That is so that I can raise them up and stack them in the freezer so it'll take up less room. At this point, I'm not sure how I'm going to do the paprika peppers, so I've decided to go ahead and cut these into rings and freeze dry them that way. If I want to powder them, I can. If I need them smaller or something, I can chop them later after they've been freeze dried. So it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to cut them into rings. The seeds on the inside, I really don't want or need. As I finish cutting up the peppers, I will put them on a freeze dryer tray. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll cover them up with plastic, put the legs on, stick them in the freezer, and go from there. In arranging them on the freeze dryer tray, my biggest concern is airflow. I want to make sure that air can get to all of the peppers all at once. If they're stacked or touching really bad, then it's not going to freeze dry very well. The celery, I'm going to go ahead and chop the white part off at the bottom, and if I need to, the very tips of the celery. It's a little bit older celery, and I didn't want it to go to waste. That's why I wanted to go ahead and make a powder out of it. So I'm going to cut it down the middle of the ribs and then chop it into nice fine diced pieces. I'm also going to cut them into moon-shaped pieces or slices, and then I'm going to separate the leaves as well. So I'll have 3 different types: slices, dices, and the leaves. Before I got a freeze dryer, I would do this same thing, only I would spread these out on a cookie sheet or something similar and put it in the oven on its very lowest possible setting. You can also use a food dehydrator to get the moisture out of these vegetables, and you'd achieve roughly the same results. I will use the slices for making my powder. The diced I can use to make powder or put into like soups and stews and those type of things if I need just a small amount. What I found is the smaller I have in things, the less people notice them. I tend to go a little small. For the leaves, again, those I'll probably leave as leaves and put them into other food dishes. When I put these on the freeze drying tray, I'm going to separate them out so that I can easily tell what's what, and I will also then be able to separate it out when I'm done so that I can keep them divided. And like the peppers, I want to make sure that there's not a huge heaping amount altogether. I want them spread out so that air will flow between it. It's okay if they're touching as long as there's good airflow. I'm going to do the carrots similar to what I did for the celery. I'm going to chop them up. I might leave some in slices. I might dice them. The goal is to have it so that I can make powders if I need to, or use them as is in whatever food dish I have. If you're enjoying this video, it'd be appreciated if you would go ahead and hit that like button. Be sure to also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and to share this content on your other social media so that more people can see the things that you're finding helpful. The carrots will also go on a freeze-dry tray, and again, I'm going to make sure that things are together, but yet not stacked in such a way that it impedes airflow. Just need that airflow to go around all the different pieces so that it'll dry. For the apples, I'm going to make sure that the core is removed, and then I'm also going to cut them into slices. I'm not planning to powder these. I'm planning to have these just as they are as a snack. They're really good. They've got a nice crunch when they're done. I could, when I'm done, if I wanted to, chop them really fine and add them to like oatmeal or to cookies, or maybe do a cake or something like that. That would be fine. I just have to make sure that I'm adding enough moisture to cover the moisture that I'm taking out. But my goal at the moment is just to eat them as apples. I may throw them in with some other fruit like bananas and strawberry and watermelon and blueberries and make a dried fruit salad. But they're just here to enjoy and to fill up the freeze dryer. I've been mentioning that I want to make sure that I'm not stacking the contents too close together to keep from the freeze dryer from doing its job. We have to have airflow. Now, the apples, it's really, really important compared to the other things that we've done because of the density of the apple compared to the porous nature of the carrots and the celery and the onions and all that. So these are going to have a much harder time freeze drying than those other items are. So here I am going to stack them. I'm going to try my best to make sure that they do not get overstacked and cause an issue where it's just too hard to get through all of the layer of the apple for freeze drying. Everything's going to end up being in the freezer overnight. This is a pre-freeze. I find that the freeze dryer does a better job if I freeze them before I put them in. I could freeze them in the freeze dryer itself, but I find that it takes so much longer for the freeze dryer to do it. And my freezer on my refrigerator is going to be running anyway. I have room, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it through the freezer rather than the freeze dryer. And the bread is there just to finish filling up the tray. The first thing I'm going to do for freeze drying, this is the next day, I'm going to close the drain valve. Then I'm going to hit the start button. And it's going to ask me frozen or not frozen. I'm going to say frozen and let it cool down. I'm going to pull everything out of the freezer when it gets down to about 32 degrees. Then I'll load up all the trays and slide them in all the way to the back. Then I'm going to tell it to start, and it's going to run for a while. It reminds you to close the drain valve, but you saw that I already did that. It took about a half an hour to cool down the freeze dryer to get started. And this batch, it took 27 hours and 37 minutes to run the batch to get all the moisture out. And this is what it looked like when it was done. Once you pull things out of the freeze dryer, you want to make sure it's dry. So I have just a moisture meter. It's normally used for wood, but it does great for this purpose. So if you notice, I'm sticking it into the food and it's coming back as there's no moisture in it. When I put it on myself, it's registering someplace between 15 and 20%. So I know that I've gotten it well done. So I double check a couple of times against myself just to make sure the moisture is running. Again, it should read around 15 to 20% on my skin. Should read nothing when I go to package it up. So I know that I'm going to use these apples soon rather than long-term storage. So I'm just going to put these in a vacuum seal bag and call it good. If I were going to do this for long-term storage, I would put it in a Mylar bag, which cuts out all the light, and then I would also put in an oxygen absorber. I will be vacuum sealing these, so the air is going to be pulled out of it anyway. So that this method, I could store them for several months, maybe up to a year without any problem. Any longer than that, then they'll break down and just won't be any good without being in a Mylar bag. You'll also notice I'm working as quickly as I can. I need to get these out of the atmosphere in the room as quick as possible because they will absorb the moisture from the air, and I really don't want that. So the apples are going to be the most susceptible to pulling in the moisture, so I want to get them done as quickly as possible. Here I'm just going to vacuum seal it. It'll shrink up around it and it'll be good to go. And I'll put this in our short-term storage. I could also put these in a glass jar, canning jar, and then I've got an adapter for my vacuum sealer that will seal the lid on through the vacuum. But because of space reasoning, I've chose to go the plastic bag route. I would have to use many jars to hold this many apples, so it's just a whole lot easier to put them in the plastic. For the onions, I can only test the moisture in the rings, and that is because I need to have a continuous piece of product to test, because between the electrodes, the pointing things on the meter, there has to be able for a current to pass between them. So I can't do that on the small pieces because I don't have any small pieces big enough to go from point to point. But on the rings I do. You saw that it's fine. Again, I'm planning on powdering these rings, so I'm going to use the short-term storage of the uh, plastic bags. The um, diced onion, I'm going to put them in something else. I'm just separating them out because I'm having different purposes for how I'm going to use them. These will be considered short-term storage. I am not planning for these to last more than a year, so I just need to get them out of the atmosphere as quick as I can and get them sealed up. I'm going to do similar things with the rest of the fruits and vegetables, so just sit back and watch as I seal up the rest of these. To make the powder, all I'm going to do is either use my blender or a food processor, and I'm going to put it on high speed and just let it go. I find that my Vitamix here does a better job. It makes a finer powder, but that can be both beneficial and detrimental because for the onions, it's great to have it nice and fine. For the celery, I tend to like it just a little bit grainier, a little bit bigger. So using the food processor does a better job for it. So depending on how you want to use your powder when you're done will dictate which one you use. You'll notice that I did not immediately open my Vitamix. That powder needs a chance to settle. Same thing will be true with the food processor, though not quite as bad. If you're doing things like Tabasco or habanero or any of those hot peppers, you really need to be careful about opening these up immediately. I'm going to go ahead and store these in jars that had spices in them to begin with, and I'll use them just like I would anything else. If it starts to stick together, you can add a little bit of cornstarch, and that will allow it to flow just a little bit better. You can add a touch of salt, but I'm trying to watch my salt, so I'm not adding any salt. But you very easily could. That would help it also. You can also use rice in the shaker if your holes are small enough that the rice doesn't come out. You can put some dry rice in there, and that'll help also to pull out some of that moisture. There's nothing wrong with it if it clumps together. It just means it's absorbed moisture from within the room into your powder. Just stir it up, whatever, and it's just fine. You can make some really good powders this way. I've done it with garlic, Tabasco, cayenne, paprika, onions, carrot, tomatoes, all kinds of stuff. For the hot peppers, make sure that you let it settle before you open that lid. Otherwise, you'll get a face full of hot pepper powder, which is no fun. So try it. Don't be afraid. Just get it dry and then powder it up, and you'll save yourself a bunch of salt, a bunch of expense, and this actually tastes better. I'm finding that the flavors come through so much better than the store-bought kinds. Thank you for watching.